What if the terrifying beasts and monstrous dragons described in the prophetic books of the Bible were not literal creatures of evil, but were actually coded symbols for ancient, non-human intelligences that once walked the earth, beings of immense power and wisdom that the prophets encountered in visionary states? And what if these dragon kings were not always adversarial, but were originally guardians of sacred knowledge, their true nature deliberately obscured by later scribes who sought to demonize anything that challenged the emerging monotheistic paradigm? In the hidden archives beneath the ancient city of Petra, carved into the very bedrock of the desert mountains, there exists a library that predates the Nabatean civilization, a collection of scrolls and tablets written in a language that combines Proto-Sinaitic, early Aramaic, and symbols that appear in no known human script, and these texts claim to contain the original, unedited visions of the Hebrew prophets, revealing what they truly saw before their encounters were filtered through the theological lens of a nascent religion seeking to establish its sole authority. In the spring of 2024, a linguist specializing in ancient Semitic languages, Dr. Elias Thorne, was granted unprecedented access to a newly discovered chamber within the Petra archives, a space that had been sealed for millennia and that bore no markings of human entry since its original construction. The chamber was filled with scrolls made from an unknown material that glowed faintly with an internal light, and as Elias carefully unrolled the first scroll, he found himself looking at a text that defied all his academic training. It was a version of the book of Ezekiel, but it contained passages that were missing from every known canonical and apocryphal edition, sections that described Ezekiel's encounter not with a fiery chariot, but with a being of immense serpentine power whose scales shimmered with the colors of the cosmos and whose eyes held the wisdom of countless ages. The text described this being not as a demon or an enemy of God, but as a king of the deep, a guardian of primordial knowledge, one of the ancient ones who had helped shape the earth before humanity's arrival. Ezekiel's original vision, as recorded in this scroll, depicted a profound communion with this being, a transmission of understanding about the nature of creation, the cycles of time, and the hidden forces that governed the cosmos. The terrifying imagery of wheels within wheels, of living creatures with multiple faces, was not a description of a celestial vehicle, but of the energetic signature of this dragon king, a being whose form transcended human comprehension and whose presence radiated power that could be perceived only through visionary states. Elias, a devout man who had always understood the biblical prophets through the lens of traditional theology, felt his entire worldview beginning to unravel. The scroll suggested that the glory of the Lord that Ezekiel saw was not an anthropomorphic deity, but a manifestation of this dragon king, a being that represented a facet of the divine that later monotheism had deliberately suppressed. The text explained that these dragon kings were not evil, but were custodians of the earth's deepest mysteries, beings who had chosen to remain in the unseen realms after humanity's consciousness had become too dense to perceive them, waiting for the time when humans would once again be ready to integrate the wisdom they carried. He found similar passages in other scrolls, versions of Isaiah, Daniel, and even fragments of Genesis that spoke of serpents of wisdom and kings of the deep who had guided humanity in its earliest stages, teaching the arts of civilization, the principles of sacred geometry, and the knowledge of the stars. These beings were depicted as benevolent, as teachers and protectors, but their power was so immense that later scribes, fearing their influence or seeking to consolidate religious authority, had systematically demonized them, transforming them into symbols of evil, into the very serpent that tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. The serpent in the garden, one scroll explained, was not a creature of evil, but a dragon king, a teacher who offered humanity the knowledge of duality, the capacity to discern between light and shadow, good and evil, so that humans could evolve beyond unconscious innocence into conscious wisdom. The fall was not a punishment, but an initiation, a necessary step in humanity's journey toward self-awareness, and the expulsion from the garden was not a banishment, but a separation, a moment when humanity chose to experience itself as distinct from the divine, so that it could eventually return to unity not through blind obedience, but through conscious choice, having integrated the knowledge that the Dragon King had offered. Elias realized that the entire narrative of the Bible, as he had known it, was a carefully constructed allegory, a coded message designed to hide in plain sight a much older and more complex spiritual history, a history that included non-human intelligences, cosmic cycles, and a profound understanding of consciousness that transcended the simplistic dualities of good and evil, heaven and hell, God and Satan. The Dragon Kings were not the enemies of God, but were aspects of the divine itself, primordial forces that had been demonized to serve a specific theological and political agenda. He spent months in the chamber, meticulously translating and cross-referencing the scrolls, and as he did, he felt his own consciousness expanding, his perceptions shifting, as though the ancient texts were not just conveying information, but were activating dormant capacities within his own being. He began to have vivid dreams, not just of the prophets and their visions, but of the Dragon Kings themselves, immense beings of light and energy whose presence filled him with a sense of awe and recognition, a feeling that he was remembering something he had known in a distant past. In one particularly vivid dream, he found himself standing before a being that combined the features of a lion, an eagle, a bull, and a man, its body shimmering with iridescent scales, its eyes ancient and compassionate. This was the being that Ezekiel had encountered, the Dragon King of the Deep, and it spoke to Elias not through words but through direct transmission of knowing, downloading centuries of wisdom in moments that felt like eternities. "You are remembering," the Dragon King communicated, "what was forgotten when humanity chose separation over unity, when the sacred was divided into good and evil, when the feminine was suppressed and the masculine was declared supreme. We, the Dragon Kings, were not cast out by God, but chose to withdraw from human perception when your consciousness became too dense to perceive us, when your fear of the unknown transformed us into monsters. But we have always been here, guarding the Earth's deepest mysteries, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to reclaim the knowledge that we carry." The Dragon King showed Elias visions of what the world had been like in ancient times, when humans and these non-human intelligences had coexisted in a state of sacred partnership, when knowledge was transmitted directly through consciousness rather than through written texts, when the earth was understood as a living being whose energetic currents were tended by both humans and Dragon Kings working in harmony. And he saw what had happened when that partnership was broken, when fear and the desire for control led humanity to demonize what it did not understand, to suppress what it could not dominate, to rewrite history to fit a narrative of singular divine authority. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. When Elias emerged from the chamber, he was no longer the same man. His academic skepticism had been replaced by a profound spiritual certainty, his traditional faith by a direct experiential knowing that transcended dogma. He understood that his discovery was not just an academic breakthrough, but a spiritual calling, that he was meant to be one of the bridges between the ancient wisdom and the modern world, helping to restore the knowledge of the Dragon Kings that had been deliberately erased from the biblical narrative. He began to publish his findings, not in academic journals, but through online platforms, reaching millions of people who had also felt a sense of unease with the traditional interpretations of biblical prophecy, who sensed that there was something more, something deeper, something that had been hidden. He presented his translations of the original scrolls, showing how the terrifying beasts of Revelation and Daniel were actually coded symbols for the return of these ancient intelligences, not as forces of destruction, but as catalysts for transformation, ushering in a new age of sacred partnership between humanity and the earth, between the visible and invisible realms. The religious establishment responded with outrage, accusing Elias of heresy and blasphemy, claiming that he was distorting the sacred texts and leading people astray. But the condemnation only served to amplify his message, drawing more and more seekers who recognized in his words an echo of their own deepest intuitions, a confirmation of what they had always suspected, that the Bible contained hidden truths that the church had deliberately suppressed. Elias spent his remaining years teaching what the Dragon Kings had revealed, showing how the biblical prophets, in their visionary states, had encountered these non-human intelligences and had recorded their experiences in language that was later reinterpreted to fit a patriarchal, monotheistic framework. He taught that the end times were not about divine judgment, but about a planetary awakening, a moment when humanity would finally be ready to reclaim its ancient partnership with the earth and with the Dragon Kings who had always been here, waiting for us to remember. In his final testament, written as illness consumed his body but left his consciousness blazing with the light of the Dragon Kings, Elias returned to the hidden chamber in Petra and added his own inscription to the glowing scrolls, his words joining those of Ezekiel and Isaiah and Daniel, adding his testimony to the lineage of those who had seen beyond the veil. "The Dragon Kings are not coming," he wrote. "They have always been here, waiting for us to awaken to their presence, to remember the sacred covenant that bound humanity to the earth and to the ancient intelligences that guard its deepest mysteries." The prophets saw them not as demons, but as divine messengers, as custodians of wisdom that humanity desperately needs if it is to survive the crisis it has created through its separation from nature and from the sacred. The Bible, when read with awakened eyes, is not a book of fear but a map of transformation, a guide to reclaiming our ancient partnership, a testament to the enduring presence of the Dragon Kings who were demonized but never destroyed, who were hidden but never truly lost, who wait now for those who have the courage to see what the prophets really saw, to hear what they truly heard, to remember what was deliberately erased, and through that remembering to restore the sacred balance that alone can carry humanity into the future that wants to be born, a future where the Dragon Kings and humanity walk together once again, as they were always meant to, as the original prophecies foretold, as the hidden scrolls reveal to those who have eyes to see and hearts to receive the truth that was hidden in plain sight, waiting for the time when the world would be ready to reclaim its ancient wisdom and its sacred partnership with the Dragon Kings of the Bible. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.